Hello viewers, welcome back to my channel Radhika Tech Hub. In this tutorial, we are going to discuss today what is context and why we have to use the context. So, in the last video, we are discussed about the prop stealing. For the prop stealing, we are passing the data from one component to another component. From that component, if we require any data to the other component, means we will pass from that component to the other component. So, as usual, you can see here which has been kept the component A, component B, and component C. In the component A, we are calling or importing our component B in the component A and passing the props to the component B. In the component B, again we are importing the component C. So here what is happening means the continuously top to bottom approach, we are passing the data from one component to another component. And in this way, if we pass like this means if there is a student data as a sections of A, B and C, we consider as from one component. As like of that, in the component A, I required only the A grade students which are present in that class, so only A grade people. For that, we are passing the complete data. So in that we are passing, and from that the component B we are importing in the component A. So again the data is passing from there, and component C we are getting above 90 or below 50 people. So like this, the data which is passing from the three components. So like this, if we pass the data means whether we are no required the data which is present in the data, there is no required in that components. Still we are pass. Still we are getting the data. So this contains the insecurity of the data. So if we pass the data like this means, and we are continuously have to pass from one component to other component, the cycle will be present here. So to secure the data, we are using the context API. So what is context API? The context API provides the passing of data, but here the data will be stored as a global. So wherever we require the data, directly we call the data which we has been stored in the variable or any value which we has been stored, we can get the data directly in that component itself, not another component. We are not passing from data from component to component to component. So directly we can call and we can use wherever we require. So the way it passes the data between the components, but in the form of provider and consumer contexts, components like that. So the way it passes the data into the all our component tree, but as the context API will be used for the small applications. So afterwards we will use the Redux. As a part of this, the difference of props drilling and the context API is the way it stores the data globally and passes the data all over the components. So as of this, it will not pass the data from component to component. So the way we will use and the structure of the context API is, first we have to create the context, and we have to set up our we have to define our context provider. So in that provider, we have to make our components as a consumers where we will store the data. So first we will create the context. It allows across the data into all components. It shares the data all over the components. So and we will define the context provider, and this provider will passes the data to the other components which allows the components. So as of you will use react router DOM. So in that react router DOM we will use the first browser router and the routes and the route, and the route will be present inside of the route. As the same of like that, we will keep our components in the provider, because the name itself defining that provider, it provides or it allows, it passes the data to all over the component. It stores the data as a globally, as it make of we create this as of like store. So We'll create the context and we'll provide. In that provider, we will pass our consumers. We will pass the components. So where we will use the data which is come from the provider is like a consumer. The components which are using the data coming from the provider we consider as a consumer, and these consumers will be providing inside the provider. So the consumers uses the data, the provider provides the data. So all over this provider and consumer will be happen in the create context. So this is the how structure we will follow for the context API. We will take a small example, and in the next video we will use the context API and we will do the a small application like that. So first we'll how to set up our create our context we will see now. So all you know that how to create the React application, how to set up in the Visual Studio. So has been created React application. So first we'll see the output. So welcome to Radhika TechHub, and one we will create our context now. Well, create one folder. In that we will make our components. So context components which are nothing but consumers. So I will make as a consumer one like that. And we'll make another component. First we have to create our context, right? So first we'll create that one. So first we'll create export const. I will make it as in a store, naming as a store equals to create context. So before that we have to install, right? So first we'll install it. npm I react context API. So you can see here also in the browser will make so you can here like context API npm also. So you can see here. So this is the how we have to copy. So we'll create the context API. You can see create context. So we created our context. The first step is completed. Now we have to define the providers. So we'll define the providers. So we name it as a store for the creating of context. So store dot provider, as it is reflecting already. So in the provider we allow the components, so we have to consider those are the consumers. So we import our, so we have to call those two components here inside the provider. So you can see here I am not passing any props here. So we'll define one data here. So I am taking ID as a 1. So with the IDs of 5 has been taken, created our data of JSON data. So now we'll pass this data, we'll create one use state here. So use state, I'm passing here data directly. So now this data we will store in our context, right? So we'll store this data in our context. So in provider, we'll pass as a value here. So now our data is a global. So now if we want to use this data, we have to call our context. We have to use our context, and because the provider, it provides the data to the consumers which are inside of the provider. So now we can use this data in one component and second component also. Now how to use this data, how to call this data, we'll see now. So now the data is stored in the form of data and set data. If you want to change any manipulations, if we require, done in child components also. The changes which has been changing here will be reflected there also. So now the data which is stored in the form of data and set data. As of now, we are not doing any changes in the consumer one, so consumer one. So no need of this. I directly call have use context. So in the use context, we created our context as of name is store. Now we can use this data. So here I already installed MUI. So I'm using the card in the MUI. So in the card content, I'm using the topography, and this I am using the map to get the names, only names in the consumer one class. So we'll use this topography here, name. We'll check the output once. So you can see here the names are displayed here in the card. So we'll move the card in the center. So the card is too small, we'll make it as somewhat big. Now it's okay. Now we'll check about our second component. So we'll move to the second one. So the data. So use context. So we'll name it as a store. So now the same will copy here. Content. Now we will make it as per the marks we will display. Will display above 70. So here info dot marks greater than 70. Not here. So the person who are having greater than 70, those names will be displayed. So what are the names we'll see here? So Vijay, Mahesh and Ram. So we'll make it as here we'll make it as a marks also. So we're not called our second component, right? Now we'll see the output. So we can see here the two members which is greater than 70 is a Ram and another name. See which are displaying here, Ram and Mahesh. So this is the how we'll use the context, and without passing the probes to the component from one component to another component, the data which is stored globally in the context. So we have to make only define the provider and the components where we want to use the data. So the components we have to define under the provider, then we can use the data and the data which is defined in the context. So the data is passed globally to the entire components. This is how we'll use the context API. If you like this video, subscribe to my channel and click on the bell icon. It will give the notifications.